A reading from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. Do you not know that in a race, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the game goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. May God bless our hearing and understanding of these holy words. Thanks be to God.
Good morning, Grace. I'd like to begin this morning by introducing you to the gender symbols I've chosen to represent the focus each week of this worship series. The first two symbols were used to denote the sex of plants by Carl Linnaeus in 1751. Linnaeus was a Swedish botanist, zoologist, taxonomist, and physician. Since most plants already begin intersexed, he used these symbols to keep track of the plants during the process of crossbreeding them. He regularly used this symbol for male and this one for female. And he began using this for hybrids, but later favored using the multiplication sign, the letter X. These symbols are believed to be an abbreviation of the ancient Greek names of the planets Mars, Venus, and Mercury. It wasn't until the 1960s that the male and female symbols were to be used in distinguishing our public toilets. When I first conceived of this worship series, I figured that discussing the male gender of God was going to be so simple. But it wasn't until this last week when it occurred to me that to bring honor to each gender discussion was actually going to be more difficult. This Frank and Ernest cartoon gets credit for teaching me a little bit about the complacency I used to have regarding the differences of gender. Quote, Fred Astaire was great, but don't forget that Ginger Rogers did everything he did, but backwards and in high heels. We may recognize a civilization as patriarchal, but women know that they were not only assisting the men in fulfilling their gender roles in the patriarchy, they were simultaneously also fulfilling their own responsibilities at the same time. God has been male for most everyone for thousands of years. And unfortunately, our English language has not recognized a singular non-gendered pronoun until more recently. I've had to get used to using they, them for some of my friends and family. And it was a friend of mine that pointed out that they, them has been a singular pronoun option for a long time. We are just not accustomed to using it that way. Using they, them for God can be supported biblically, but it may take a little more time until we get used to it. But we have next week to look into this topic a little deeper. Still, there seems to be a curious obsession by some to defend our use of the male gender, God. We should acknowledge that our historic civilizations have all been predominantly patriarchal, and that our sacred scriptures have been predominantly authored by men. With that was included the long-standing stereotype that men were stronger and smarter than women. But if stronger and smarter women were punished under patriarchy for expanding their roles and abilities, well, you can see why they had to work harder to do their parts. I grew up in a household in which the father was the breadwinner and the mother raised the children and put food on the table. I believed that this was how things were supposed to be for everyone. It wasn't until I was an adult that I really understood how this perspective could play out for our overall history. My earliest images of God were of a white man in a white robe with a long white beard, sitting in a throne in the clouds with Jesus at his right-hand side. This image of mine was a product of our history, when religions and governments used to be interchangeable. Landowners were known as lords. All of them were men. The pharaohs, kings, and emperors, also mostly men, would literally take on the personas of gods. There's a saying that those who win wars go on to write the history books. And those who sit in thrones of power may dictate that culture to the others who follow. Later, those rules would be repeated and taught as if they had come down from above. A specific example of how such a thing may be perpetuated is seen in the celebration of a holiday that comes nearest to October 12th. I read in a history book in elementary school how Christopher Columbus discovered America. His discovery, I learned, led to the pilgrims who brought with them food from Europe. And my picture book showed them placing colorful food on the tables while the indigenous Indians shared corn for the Thanksgiving meal. The colors were bright. All the people were smiling. And this was the history as I learned it in the 70s. It was a story of American history that I would go on to replay with my friends as we would play make-believe in our backyards. This American history has been repeated in our nation for generations upon generations. And not until more recently has this specific history by a dominating culture been brought even into question. Fortunate students today will learn that Christopher Columbus actually got lost. The indigenous people were confused with actual people from India, and that his discovery resulted in generations of injury and suffering. More and more, people are swapping these fake historic accounts for more accurate ones. And tomorrow, we will appropriately celebrate Indigenous Peoples' Day. Nonetheless, we still have the God of our fathers and the God of our fathers' fathers, a powerful, vengeful, and jealous type of God. Many people, including women, still find the male image of God comforting. Well, it is comforting to feel protected by strength and power. It is comforting for some to think of a male God watching over, or even prefer a male voice from the church pulpit. We may even confuse these preferences as factual accuracies, such as I did as a child, believing that they should be acceptable to everyone. But remember that we will perpetuate the truth only as we know it until we have different information to inform us. I had the gift of reading female authors and theologians, along with knowing female clergy colleagues and church members, learning from their experiences and perspectives. I've chosen to incorporate more images of God and less binary images of God into our worship and teachings. These women taught me to be more discerning when selecting artwork and music for our times of worship. As an example, some of you may recall that in this very sanctuary, we have sung the refrain, "Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God." Not so bad if we just sing past the male pronouns. But the reason we only sing the refrain from this song is because the rest of the lyrics are slightly more toxically male, making them slightly less awesome. When he rolls up his sleeves, he ain't just putting on the Ritz. There's thunder in his footsteps and lightning in his fists. Judgment and wrath he poured out on Sodom. Mercy and grace he gave us on the cross. Our God is an awesome God. Remember, these symbols of God reveal more about those who wrote the scriptures and the songs than they reveal about God. Let us also be careful in this conversation to not fall into a stereotype that the God of the Hebrew scriptures is jealous and violent, while the one from the Christian scriptures is not. In actuality, there are beautiful stories of God's blessings, forgiveness, and grace in the former, as well as stories of God's judgment and jealousy and violence in the latter. Though we do need to discuss our God from the New Testament. I remembered an article from years ago that argued the reason fewer men than women attended worship services was because they grew tired of Jesus being portrayed as a sissy. This article also suggested that the shrinking church memberships was due to the growing number of women leading churches and preaching from our pulpits. Now, at the same time as this article, I was also studying for ministry, and I could not help but compare these statements to what I actually observed in the makeup of my seminary classmates. My classmates, not so ironically, were predominantly female. Of those men present, roughly 20 to 30% of them were out gay. And a substantial number of all of them were non-white. One of them was deaf and a few other in wheelchairs. I thought to myself, the church had better get ready for diversity because here we come. God was not calling white, cisgendered people as much as God was calling the diversity of humanity to pastor the people. The truth is that our religions have struggled to attract men for centuries. Our religions used to be about crusades and missionary colonization until an occasional brave person would risk standing up to say, "Hold on, Can we just stop killing each other? Jesus was one such brave person. He taught us that our strength could be revealed in modeling sacrifice. He also showed us a distinct image of God, one who is intimately close as a nurturing and caring member of our family. Jesus prayed to Abba, Father, while at the Garden of Gethsemane shortly before his death. And the Apostle Paul also repeated this image of God in his letters to Rome and Galatia. Abba is an Aramaic word that translates into English to mean father. It is also thought of in a way a son or a daughter might informally address their parent, such as Papa. This name further implies the relationship that a child has as their parent's inheritor. We just understand, more importantly than God's gender, that when Jesus instructed his disciples to begin their prayers to our Father, he was profoundly changing our relationship with God. When he did this, Jesus was opening the inheritance of God's kingdom to all the people of all the different origins. Everyone could now call God Papa. Even the Gentiles, even you, and even me, all are part of Papa's family, all worthy of receiving the inheritance of God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. In closing, I want to offer this blessing. May our awesome God, who shows strength and also sacrifice, bless you with comfort and security in your gender and being, as well as in his. Amen.